So I was a couple weeks ago. I was sitting retreat at Insight Meditation Society, and it was a 10-day retreat, and the lead teacher on that retreat was Michele McDonald, and she is based in Hawaii, and but was a very early staff member at IMS and has been practicing and teaching in that scene since I think 1975. And she's not a super prominent. How many people just have heard her name? You know, okay, yeah, she's not very prominent. And it's actually interesting to sort of track like why some teachers become prominent and some remain in relative obscurity. And but she's been an important teacher for a lot of people, and she's offering something quite beautiful. So I kind of want to I hope this Dharma talk is not like 30 minutes of fan mail kind of situation, but that's a little how I feel. So is a little curious that I felt so struck by her because we are super different. Like, she is kind of this sort of like shamanic, wild ass woman, you know, like just you can just feel the lawlessness barely contained, you know? And like my spirit animal is like an anxious Jewish accountant. The people laughing loudest are the ones who know me most. So it's like super different, but still like a very deep kind of resonance. And I don't know, it just felt, I've had all male teachers, and I'm quoting men, if you haven't noticed, all the time here, yeah? And it felt so good to, have this kind of like a sense of real kind of reverence and appreciation, devotion with a female teacher. And, I joking about fan mail or something, but I am conscious of the kind of the mechanisms of idealization and, the ways that that happens, and, want to have no kind of delusions about this being a perfect being, but I also feel like, sometimes actually it's important to have idealizable figures, It's important to just kind of surrender the heart in a certain way and just have a sense of a certain kind of reverence for something in their being, not to have some idealized vision of them as a complete human being, but we can see things in others and be like, feel moved by that or inspired in some way. So I wanted to say something about just my impressions of her and kind of summarize some of the core aspects of her teaching that I seem most onward leading. Part of what teachers are doing is they're really making their minds available. And part of what happens in the exchange in the context of practice, is that the teacher, consciously and unconsciously, tries to give some flavor of their mind, and this is part of why I feel very sensitive to the container, so like when we actually get quiet and still, and there's not a lot of noise coming, there's not a lot of stuff that's like stimulating our nervous system or putting us on the defensive, but when we like really just settle. And sometimes that happens here, but it is really prominent when you sit in retreat. But there's a certain kind of field that's created, and ideally the teacher is embodying something or sharing in such a way that that people can actually, it's like, get to sit in their mind. And in talking to Michele, we were talking a little bit about. I was there just as a yogi, and I don't even know if she knew I taught when I met her, but we were chatting a little bit about teaching, and one of the things she said is like, teaching is transmission, that kind of like sacred, silent exchange. Teaching is transmission, and a lot of teachings are like, they may be these elaborate kind of conceptual frameworks of this is how it fits together, these are the pieces, these are the Four Noble Truths, this is the Eightfold Path or something. And I'm not dismissive of that information at all, but it sometimes can just live in the conceptual realm. And that's satisfying for the kind of intellectual aspect of our mind. And it feels like, okay, we're putting things in order, we've got a map or something. But a lot of the transformative effects of practice and the student-teacher exchange is being, literally just impacted by their mind. And in her teaching, it's like, you really can get a flavor for that. Like, she tells some story. Like, sometimes I hear a story of hers and I want to retell it here because it was like so beautiful. But if I retold it here, it would sound stupid, yeah? And it would sound stupid because she is actually like transmitting her flavor of the Dharma through these kind of, pedestrian kinds of stories of encounters with people or nature or something. And yet, so it can't be retold, it can't be summarized, but in the moment, as you hear how she's relating to experience, and you actually feel a certain kind of impact of her mind and the ripeness of her practice, it's transformative. So, in many ways, she takes it like a very, very traditional kind of approach. She's a lot of training, and I think her main teacher is Sayadaw U Pandita, who is a Burmese meditation teacher and who's been a kind of founding teacher for many of the folks in the kind of pioneering generation of Vipassana teachers here. And it's a very like traditional approach in the Mahasi lineage, and so rigorous and precise and clarifying the objects of meditation with more and more precision, and the way, the way when you do Mahasi retreats or something, you sit in that tradition. The interview style is you go into the teacher and you report on the most focused period of practice that you've had since you last saw the teacher, and you describe blow by blow what you were attending to, what you noticed, how you noted it, right? What happened in response to the notes you were making, yeah? And there's like zero room for the story of self, right? Like the way I don't, when I sit on retreat and, or am teaching and conduct meetings, like that's not, I don't think that's the ideal way for all people, right? And there's one of the consequences, there's this method of reporting is it's like, if I went in there and said, oh, I'm so sad today, and I just don't feel too hopeful about practice or something, it would just be like, stop. Not like no sympathy, but just like, all right, that's what the story you've concocted, but what were you noting? Okay, I was noting the breathing at my abdomen. And how do you even know you were sad? What arose? Okay, so I was paying attention to my breath. I was noting the rising and falling of my breath. I noticed an emotional sensation, and my attention got pulled away from the breathing, and then you kind of want to go into the conceptual story mode of being like, and then I was sad. But I would be like, no. What did you note next? Yeah? Right? Did you come back to the breathing? What happened to the sadness when you started to note it in a direct way? Yeah? And so it just it starts to undercut all of the ground where the narratives of self arise, we essentially note our life away. Yeah? That's not always a good approach, but that is the traditional kind of Mahasi approach. So it gives you some flavor of a certain kind of dryness and precision. It is a real spirit of renunciation, of being willing to willing to suffer in order to know freedom. There's a kind of distinction, and maybe you've even felt this, when we pay attention to the breathing at the nostrils or mouth, it tends to have a more secluded feel. And as the mind settles, it's like the attention kind of narrows, and there's more of a sense of and I'm not even talking about deep samadhi and jhana, but there's more of a sense of absorption and seclusion. And part of what's happening in that is it feels like there's less and less that's changing. At some level, our heart is fatigued by the relentlessness of change. Yeah? And shelter from that storm is in certain forms of samadhi and the unification of the mind. And at the nostrils and mouth, that sense of seclusion tends to be more prominent. But in this approach, and the way Michele teaches, teaches actually the attention at the belly, the abdomen, the rising and falling of the breath there. And because it's a wider field of sensation, and it tends to induce a kind of less seclusion, and the changingness of experience is more prominent. Yeah? And so at some level, the abdomen represents, like the breath at the abdomen represents a compromise between the really narrow awareness of the breath right here and the expansiveness that Harmony alluded to in like all open to all six senses all the time. Yeah. One of the kind of it's just lovely kind of components of what Michele unfolded was she clearly believes in full awakening, that we can be, that it is possible to be free of greed, hatred, and delusion. And the way she talked about it, and some of the Burmese models, is like to be fully awake, to be fully free, is for there to be peace at every sense door, in every moment. So the eyes and the ears, right, and smell, and the mind, in addition to the five senses, right. And for at each sense door, for what rushes into awareness is met with peace. Yeah. And she's spent enough time with people who've been, in monastics, for decades, that she feels like it's very rare, but she feels like she's been in contact with people who are so deeply free. And she said once, like, just the scent of that freedom will make you cry. So there's this like very rigorous side, but what I find so compelling is that it's paired so elegantly with like love and tenderness and all of the heart stuff. But it's not like that heart stuff is grafted on top of the mindfulness, the vipassana, It's not like it's not like okay, we do vipassana and then we like add in metta, we add in loving kindness or compassion. It's like no. To do vipassana requires radical love. Yeah. And so she's really like in a beautiful way, and that felt a little distinctive, saying that like, look, we talk so much about opening, but you cannot do that without protection. Yeah. And that the urge to open, like almost like pulling the petals of a flower open before it's blooming, is a problem. And that there's this kind of like, we actually have to find a certain kind of reassurance and protection in mindfulness, or in love, or in the lineage of practitioners, a sense of being held by all of those who have come before us. Yeah, a kind of, the protection is that we're like, we're held in the lap of this Buddhist tradition. And so, I feel like as there's more and more interest in mindfulness, but this kind of like almost artificial offshoot of self-compassion, which is very touching to me. And the kind of there's just a lot of people benefiting a lot from that. But the shadow side of self-compassion, if it's can be that it can be. I want to be like really careful when I say this, right? So if you think I'm telling you to like be harsh to yourself when I say this, like no. But the shadow side of self-compassion, when it's not like infused with some of the wisdom, is that it can be a rationalization of some of our preferences. Yeah? Like, faced with a pizza, that's not a time for me to practice self-compassion, right? So we just like have to be honest, like how is this actually functioning in my mind, yeah? And so, but what, it's like because there's this aspect of her that's so hardcore and is so like, the urgent longing for freedom is so palpable, and the kind of like willingness to let go, to renounce feels like so at the surface, when we are encouraged to like really like just let go into love, it feels even more believable. It's like there's a part of us that trusts like, oh yeah, I'm not being sold a bill of goods here. Like this love is, I've earned it and I'm worthy of it. Yeah. And it's like something in you really knows that. And it just feels so natural just to bathe in that. Yeah. So not distinctive to Michele, but kind of like distinguishes some of the universal themes of suffering from the kind of personal habit energies and knots in ourselves. And at some level, like greed, hatred, delusion these are with us, until we're free. And those are impersonal forces. Those are a feature of our species, maybe of life itself. But she also emphasizes the kind of very idiosyncratic nature of our suffering. And she talks about, she uses this phrase of karmic knots, yeah, which is a nice phrase, yeah. And karmic knot being, she never totally defined it actually, but the kind of like deep repetitive pattern that is like, we can't believe it's not gone already. We can't like even touch it sometimes with mindfulness. It just feels too hot and we just slide, it's like the attention slides off it into oblivion of one kind or another. And so there's a kind of, for her, this is where the love is so important, that we're actually trying to develop a relationship with what feels unbearable, And retreat practice, her kind of model of retreat practice, which again is not unique, but it's she's articulate about it. It's like we're here to get free from that which we're least free from, you know. And so she said, this is not a state-oriented practice. Like, you think about that. It's not a state-oriented, like, some part of our mind is often kind of like trying to manufacture a state because it's where we think the goodness comes from. This is not a state-oriented practice. This is about learning how to be with everything so you're not afraid of anything. You're not afraid of anything because we have a relationship with it. Oh, I was hoping loneliness would come up this retreat because I don't have a good enough relationship with it. Yeah. And so, what arises in us, like these kinds of like deep habit energies, we can think of them as neither being, they are neither our fault nor are they an accident. Yeah, it's not an accident that, you know, aversion arises for me, you know, or something like that. Like that, like our kind of core themes will arise. And then there is this longing to be free, but we are very sensitive to the times when there's actually some energy and curiosity and willingness to be with the intensity of that loop. Yeah? It's like, is there actually interest? And we can't fake interest, yeah? Like we can try to get curious, yeah, but we can't actually fake interest. And we probably fake interest in certain aspects of our experience a lot, right? Like just in the last half hour, yeah? Like we're probably like, when we sit, it's like we know we're supposed to be like equanimous and open and interested and you know, but it like sometimes can feel like we're pretending, yeah? And so, okay, where's the actual, like, where is the thread of like real curiosity? And when there's energy and curiosity, we go, yeah? And so we can't kind of like outsmart our karmic knots with half-hearted fake interest. Like, do we really want a relationship with this loop of dukkha, with this pattern? Is there an actual open-heartedness, like, I want to know. I don't even care where this goes, if this is with me the rest of my life, but I'm tired of living out of relationship with it. Yeah? And so this is a way of, in a sense, it's working with our neurosis, our own neurotic kind of patterns, but it turns that not into a form of self-therapy, but into a form of liberating vipassana practice. Yeah. And so we cycle through phases of where things feel easy, with purity, sense of peace, and then there are other phases in the course of a retreat, or maybe even just a sit, where we move from sense of purity, and that opens up the space for purification. Yeah, like your question is like, okay, here's something wants to be wants a relationship with me, yeah? And that kind of cycle of the peace that follows that, and then the new arising, the re-arising of some karmic thing, we move back into a phase of purification. And we just keep spiraling down with that until there's nothing left to let go of. So just taking a breath. And just letting the words settle. So may our time together, may the goodness we've generated together, may that be a cause for more. You.